Live?
Are live.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to Bagels and Business. We're sorry you couldn't be here in person for those of you who are missing. We're super awesome welcoming Michael John Bristow. He's an awesome neuroscience-based coaching and trainer. He has served over 500 clients that were Fortune 500 clients. He's been working with them for more than a decade. He has a proven track record of success working with a wide range of people, including senior leaders, supervisors, scientists, engineers, customer service representatives, and marketing professionals. We'd like to welcome him here today. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what is, I think, the smallest group of people I've ever taught in my life. So that's exciting. It means you get individual, personalized attention today. We've got 4 online. We've got a few people here in the room as well. It is a pleasure to have you this morning. There once was a man by the name of Dr. DeBakey. Raise your hand if you recognize this guy. I'm not surprised. If I had 300 people in the room, odds are none of you would know that name. But I'll tell you, in the medical field, this man is a rock star. Dr. DeBakey was a heart surgeon, one of the best, not just in the country, but one of the best on earth. If any head of state needed heart surgery performed, they would fly out to Dr. DeBakey to make it happen. Dr. DeBakey is holding in his hands a heart pump that he himself invented in the 1970s. That's the great big one. And then the little tiny new version that he invented in the late 90s. He died in his 90s. He continued to perform surgery into his late 80s. And I assume was doing it very well, or someone would have stopped him. Well, most of us don't know the name, but I assure you, in his field, he was one of the greatest on earth. And a graduate student, he was based out of Texas, a graduate student in Texas decided to write a thesis on the effects of famous people on those around them. And she got a chance to shadow Dr. DeBakey for a week. Again, not famous in the general populace, but very much so in his particular field. So she gets up bright and early, walks to the hospital, shows up before almost anyone else is there, but Dr. DeBakey is ready and waiting. And they walk into the operating room. And Bob, the janitor, is just packing up his equipment and heading out the door. Dr. DeBakey says, hi. Bob says, hi. Dr. DeBakey says, you know, Bob, thank you. I know everything's going to be exactly where I need it to be today. Tools will be sterilized, and that'll help the surgeries go smoothly. Bob walks out the door. At the end of the week, this grad student sat down with everyone who had spoken with Dr. DeBakey, including Bob the janitor. She said, what's it like working with Dr. DeBakey? Bob said, quote, oh, it's great. Dr. DeBakey and me, we save lives. What a great thing to give Bob the janitor, and a true thing as well, to let him know that the work he did made a genuine, honest-to-goodness difference in the day-to-day running of that hospital. Dr. DeBakey is a person who clearly loved his job. Not just that, he made everyone around him love their jobs and perform their jobs better as well. Today's topic is the neuroscience of increased productivity. And so we're going to play around with people like Dr. DeBakey and others, and hopefully pull some tools and strategies for ourselves. I should introduce myself. My name is Michael John. That is the whole first name with a little hyphen in the middle. I don't know why. I don't know what my parents are planning with that, but there it is. Because it's so long, most people call me MJ, meaning I share the honor with Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, may he rest in peace. I am originally from the beautiful land of Durban, South Africa. That's where my accent is from. I grew up in one of those tall apartment buildings just a block away from that perfect mile-long white sand beach. But I've lived most of my life right here in Utah. And this is what Utah feels like after growing up in Durban, South Africa. I still live here. I don't know why, but I'm always glad to be here in the warm summers. I love the summers here in Utah, so that's great fun. Let's see what else about me. I have a beautiful little girl. She just turned 12 years old. So like any good parents, of course, I keep a picture. And I purposely chose this picture because it reminds me of this one. And every parent loves to brag about how the kid's a freaking genius, but I'm the only one with the photographic proof. So there, that's me, that's my little family. I got my degrees in cognitive neuroscience. I was a research neuroscientist for years. Eventually discovered that I like people more than I like rats. And being a research neuroscientist means rats, just piles and piles of rats. And so I started my own training and consulting company called Go Neuro. And our motto is hard science, soft skills. I focus exclusively on soft skills development, communication skills, career development, leadership growth, et cetera, et cetera. But just because we call them soft doesn't mean we don't have good hard data from the fields of psychology and neuroscience that really does give us insight into what works and what doesn't. So all of my presentations have a lot of neuroscience built in, including this one. I hope that excites you because you're getting it whether you want it or not. And we use some of that neuroscience to figure out what we can do for our own careers. Now, for me, a good presentation is a conversation. And in the day of COVID, this has become much harder. But I am not a university lecturer. I want to have a conversation. So please, at any time, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, make comments. And those of you online, you can type in your questions as well, and those are going to be read to me. So please feel free to interrupt me at any time so that this doesn't just become a lecture. Let's jump right in with a little bit of brain stuff. There's a man by the name of Daniel Kahneman, another guy whose name you probably don't recognize, but very famous in this field. He is a psychologist. He is still alive, one of the greatest psychologists on earth. He won a Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work. And he won that prize in economics because there is no Nobel Prize in psychology. But they wanted to reward him so much that they just gave it to him in economics instead. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is for popular consumption and essentially highlights the core of his research. In his book, he hypothesizes that we can split the brain really into two halves, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the subconscious part of your brain. It thinks and acts very quickly. It does not take a lot of energy. It acts on instinct, very quick again, and it's quite dumb. That's system 1. System 2 is your conscious thinking brain. It sits in your prefrontal cortex, right here in your forehead. System 2 is very slow and consumes a lot of energy, but it's also deliberate and incredibly intelligent. Your awareness, your consciousness, all of your deep learning is thanks to system 2. Now, the vast majority of your brain is system 1, not system 2. And we tend to think of who we are as our whole brain, but no. You only control a tiny percentage of your own brain. And system 1 just kind of does what it wants when it wants to. We used to think, well, at least system 2 is the president of your brain. Your subconscious throws ideas at you and then you make a choice. No, you're the press secretary. System 1 just kind of does what it wants, then makes you aware of what it's decided to do, and then your system 2 tries to come up with reasons you just did or said the things that you didn't say. This makes developing as a human a little bit tricky. Why did our brain develop this way? To be mostly subconscious and stupid with just a tiny little sliver of smart human on top. Yeah?
I have a thought.
Go ahead.
I think system 1 is an older system, and system 2 developed a lot more recently in our evolution.
You would be right. System 1 is far older than system 2. But why do we have a system 1 that's so much bigger than system 2? We've had plenty of time to evolve system 2, and it stays small. Yeah?
So I would guess that we have so much coming at us all the time that we can't always consciously think about our reasons. We've got to have a system that would kind of keep us alive at the base level.
Okay, so some kind of stimulus filter because so much is coming at us? Yeah?
Yeah, I was just going to say similar.
Okay. Our brain did not evolve in the modern world. Our brain evolved on the plains of the Serengeti. And what allows us to survive on the plains of the Serengeti is not the same as what allows us to survive in a car or at McDonald's or in all the places that we go in the current modern world. And this means that we're running software that is very, very old and is not necessarily the most useful. And this drives what I call the starving brain. I'm going to go through these. You don't need to read ahead. We're starting at the very top, the starving brain. Our brain is unlike no other animal. Even though it only weighs 3 pounds, it consumes a whopping 20% of all energy that we take into our body. And that's at rest. If your brain is actually doing stuff, it consumes even more. Now, for many of us in the modern world, this isn't a problem. In fact, if anything, the problem is we have too much food that's too easily accessible. And so our brain has all the energy it needs. But for the overwhelming majority of human history, our brain was starving. And what we would do as humans is try and feed it enough calories so the brain didn't collapse under its own weight. This is why most animals did not develop huge brains. Evolutionarily, it's a failure most of the time. We got quite lucky that we managed to pull it off. But this did create a starving brain that has built in a scarcity mindset, always worrying if it's got enough resources to be able to keep itself going. And because the brain takes so much food to run, this creates the lazy brain. Your brain tries to use as little energy as possible because for most of human history, it wasn't getting enough. And which of our two systems uses the most energy? System 1 or 2? Yeah, system 2. System 1 is the subconscious, easy part of the brain that doesn't take a lot of energy. So what that means for us as modern humans is our brain is constantly trying to shut down system 2 because it consumes so much energy. And that's the weird little tightrope we're trying to walk in the modern world. Our brain's goal is to keep us as stupid as possible because that takes less energy, but not so stupid that we end up killing ourselves. And that's the careful balance our brain is constantly trying to make. So what it's done is created a lot of shortcuts. And that goes to the third thing on my slide, the biased brain. Your brain has built a lot of biases. Now, in popular culture, bias is seen as exclusively a negative thing. But in psychology, it's value neutral. You can have good, useful biases, and you can have unhelpful biases. Biases are little programs that run in System 1 that let you do a lot of things really quickly without actually thinking about it all that much. It conserves a lot of energy, and these biases can help us. Unfortunately, they can hurt us as well. So we're going to play a little game. I'm going to throw up on the PowerPoint in just a second a paragraph. This is a speed reading test. I want you to read this paragraph as quick as you can. As soon as you're done, please raise your hand. Ready, set, go. One hand up, two hands up. Oh, now they're coming up fast. Very good. You may have noticed there's something just slightly off with this particular paragraph. Not a word is spelled right. Now notice they preserved the first letter and the last letter. Now, if anyone is dyslexic, I apologize, that totally screwed you over. But for most brains, we can read this without even slowing down. This is a great example of a mental bias. Your subconscious brain, System 1, doing a whole lot of the heavy lifting and the work for you. So this bias helps us. Here's another one. What do you think that says?
Jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, we think it says jumping to conclusions, of course, but what it really says is yammering to. Biases can hurt us too. And oftentimes our subconscious, which remember is stupid, makes a lot of wrong choices and causes us to go in a direction that might not actually be all that helpful. This happens in our careers too. Our System 2 shuts down because our brain's trying to conserve energy and we don't always make the best decisions. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is how to break through those biases. Now, I could talk biases all day long. I'm not going to highlight any specific ones. We're going to focus specifically on career development and the neuroscience of that. But there are two kinds of biases I want to highlight quickly: explicit bias and implicit bias. Explicit bias is when we have a bias in our head, we know it's there and we like it, so we keep it around. That's an explicit bias. Implicit bias is buried deep somewhere in System 1. We're probably not even aware that it's there. I want to hear from you folks. Give me an example of an explicit bias that you choose to keep around. What's one of your explicit biases? While you're thinking, I'll share one of mine. I hate meetings. I hate them. Now, when I'm in charge, I love them, of course. Isn't my accent beautiful? Aren't you glad you're here? But if I have to sit in a meeting, I can't stand it. And honest to goodness, that's most of the reason I started my own company, is because I hate meetings. That really was most of the reason. It's a bias that I have that I'm okay with, and I choose to keep it around. What's one of your explicit biases?
Having kids is good.
Having kids is good. So choosing to decide that kids are great. We live in Utah. That seems to be a relatively common explicit bias. Great, thank you for that. Any others? Yeah.
People that speak to their pets in baby talk.
Okay, so you have a bias against that.
When people are like, what you do, they're talking to their dog, it's just like fingernails on a chalkboard.
I must confess, when you did that, that annoyed me too right now. So I apparently have that same bias. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Explicit biases I'm not as worried about unless they're really nasty biases, racism, sexism. Pick your explicit bias. The implicit biases are the ones that worry me more. And there is one kind of bias I actually want to name. Oh, go ahead, Mon.
Kevin Taylor said, the school I graduated from is better than the school anyone else did. That is one of my explicit biases.
Ah, good one, Kevin. Thank you. My sports team is the best sports team. My religion's the best religion. My political party's the best political party. You can pick a range of biases right around that. Thank you. One that I do want to highlight that'll be valuable for all of us, and it's the only single bias that I'll name directly, it's called the bias blind spot. The bias blind spot, I'll actually read it out of my notes, the tendency to see oneself as less biased than other people, or to identify more biases in others than we do in ourselves. I see this all the time. I give trainings on biases, and everyone's first response is, yeah, look how biased all the people around me are. Those fools. And we tend to underestimate the number of biases that we have floating around in our own heads. Most of our biases, we don't even know they're there. Here's the interesting thing. We found that once people are made aware of them, they usually are still impacted by their biases anyway. I'm going to give you an example of this. I'm warning you ahead. This is a bias trick, but it's still going to work on your brain. Which of those tables has a greater surface area? Any guesses?
They're the same, aren't they?
They are exactly the same surface area. Let's go further. Which of those tables is longer? You know I'm tricking you, so you don't want to answer. I get that.
Yeah.
Those tables are exactly the same in every dimension. But your brain is having a very hard time right now believing this. That's why I got a hold of this measuring tape. Shall we do it? Now here's the long end of this table. It is 34 inches on this PowerPoint. I'm putting it over here. Exactly 34 inches. Let's do it again, shall we? Here's the short side. About 16, 17 inches. I put it over here. Exactly the same size. Even me having just done this, your brain has an incredibly difficult time countering its own biases. Saying, oh, this table is going back into the distance, so there's a distance effect that we need to compensate for, therefore that table must be longer. Even knowing the biases are there, this little visual trick really shows how strong an effect biases like this can have on the brain. So let's take this now into the learning world. This class is called the Neuroscience of Increased Productivity. So I want to start this next portion with a story. This is a true story that is told by two artists called the Ceramics class. Feel free to just kick back, relax, and let my beautiful accent wash over you. Here we go. The ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into two groups. All those on the left side of the studio, he said, would be graded solely on the quantity of work they produced. All those on the right, solely on its quality. His procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scales and weigh the work of the quantity group. 50 pounds of pots gets you an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. Those being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only one pot, albeit a perfect one, to get an A. Keep in mind, this is a true story. They did actually run this experiment. Here are my questions for you. At the end of the semester, which group do you think got the higher grades? The quantity group or the quality group? And we'll just do raise of hands. Raise your hand if you think the quantity group got the higher grades. Raise your hands if you think the quality group got the highest grades. We're close to 50-50. It was a quantity group. You just have to make 50 pounds of garbage and boom, you get your A. Here's a more important question. Which group produced the highest quality pots? Raise your hand if you think it was the quantity group. Raise your hand if you think it was the quality group. Raise your hand if you just don't want to bloody raise your hand right now. Okay, very good. It was the quantity group that produced the highest quality pots. Why? Repetition. So we're getting there. The fact is the quality group could have repeated just as often. So why did the quantity group make the better pots?
Because they had to make more, and so when you work more, I don't know, because if you only need to make one, you're kind of lazy about it.
Ah, okay. Thank you, Monique. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like your brain like learns shortcuts. It gives you begin to like make one. The first one's really hard, but then the second one gets progressively easier. Brain makes shortcuts.
Okay.
There's probably less pressure on the quantity. They just have to kick them out. The other ones, they're like worried too much about the outcome of it.
Ah, less pressure. Okay.
That was kind of mine too, but maybe the quality group couldn't agree on what quality actually meant, and that set them back.
The definition is trickier for
Yeah.
quality than it is for quantity.
Sure.
Here's what ended up happening in the actual class. Notice a lot of those comments were around, well, the quantity group made more pots. The quality group could have made as many pots as they wanted. They only had to turn in one. But none of them did. Here's what actually happened. The quantity group threw clay on the wheel the first day of class and were making pots. And so they had an entire semester worth of practice, an entire semester to teach their brain how to do it and create those mental shortcuts. The quality group spent almost the entire semester in the library, reading about perfect pots, studying the great pot masters of the past, and so on and so forth. And they didn't throw clay on the wheel until the very end of the semester. No one told them they had to do it that way. That's just what they ended up doing. And so because the quantity group got all that extra practice, which was my first comment, they were able to churn out a better pot in the end. Yeah.
Do you have a reference to this?
I do, yes.
Okay, good. No, I got a son in college, and this would be perfect.
Grab me after class. I can give you the book. It came out of a nice little book that I found years ago.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let me summarize. I'll put it up on the PowerPoint. So here's what I get out of this story, and I'll have you help me fill in the blanks. Lesson number 1, learn by doing. Yes, learn by doing. And don't be too afraid of making mistakes. Crap. Either word works, really. Mistakes are the toll that we pay on the highway to mastery. I like to say that we can get to mastery without making mistakes, but it's going to take a lot longer than if we allow ourselves to just make mistakes along the way. And it took me a while to learn this lesson, because something to know about me, I'm a rabid perfectionist. Dangerously so. And that just happened to be born into my brain for whatever reason. Something else to know about me, I love to write. Creative writing, short stories, full books, etc., etc. Love it. And so when I was working on my undergrad, I decided to double major with English as well. Not because I thought an English degree would be worth anything to me money-wise in the future, but because I just love the language. And I signed up for a creative writing class, which is one of my real passions. The first day of class, the professor got up and she said, for this class, oh, excuse me, before I tell you that part, when I would sit down to write a short story, and this is my perfectionism coming through, I would write it 5-6 pages, hack it down, rewrite it, tear it apart, rewrite it again, take it through about 40 or 50 drafts over a period of 6 months. That's for 5 pages, folks, 6 months, before I would let anyone see it. Not my spouse, not family members, no one, until I thought it was as perfect as it could possibly be. This creative writing class, the professor gets up and she says, for this class, you need to bring in a new short story every time we meet. The class was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every week. Suddenly, all of my beautiful perfectionist attitudes that I built up over the years were worthless. I just had to churn out stuff. And so I'd come to class with the first draft, or if I was very lucky, maybe I got it to a second draft. I'd feel miserable about it. And then the worst thing in the world would happen to me. We'd trade stories. And my classmates would pull out their red pens and they would start hacking away at my story. As a perfectionist, I do not have the words to describe how uncomfortable this made me. And here's what I learned from that class. I found that with my classmates' red pens, I could get a short story to a really good place in about 2 weeks. Whereas on my own, it took me about 6 months. That's what I mean when I say mistakes are the toll that we pay on the highway to mastery. Perfectionism kills development. You can still get there, but it typically takes much, much longer than if we let people see our mistakes from the very beginning and invite them to help us along the way. And the third lesson I pull from that story, the best motivation for improvement is what? Internal or external? We're getting some externals. I'm voting internal. My brain is not going to do anything unless my brain decides to motivate itself for whatever reason. External stuff can help, but it's the desire and the passion to want to do it better that is likely to drive us to actually do that thing better, whatever it is. And so what I'd like to share with you today is a model that we've put together for effective learning. And this model is based on some of the greats in human history. A few years ago, I wanted to write a book with a title something like that. I wanted to look at the greats from history in whatever field they are. So your Michael Jordans, your Michael Jacksons, your Leonardo da Vinci's, your Julius Caesars, your Albert Einsteins. And what I was trying to figure out is what made these people tick. How did they become the very best in the world in their own particular field? My hope was I could crack a code. I could find some kind of list of things to do, hopefully super easy, so I could become the best in the world at something with as little effort as possible. That was my real goal. And I thought to round out my research, I shouldn't just do dead people. I need to find some of the best living people right now. Getting famous people to talk to me was an interesting experience in and of itself. I was not terribly successful, but I did manage to grab one person. Her name is Susan Polgar. Raise your hand if you know who Susan Polgar is. I play this game a lot. I'm not surprised. There are 300 people in the room who probably wouldn't know the name, but she is one of the best in the world in her particular field. She was the first female chess grandmaster in all of history. That is Susan Polgar. And she was kind enough to actually talk to me, which was really cool. I want to share a bit of her story. Her father was not a chess grandmaster, but he was a chess coach and considered to be one of the best in Europe. Long before she was born, her father gained a lot of notoriety for saying it doesn't take any special talent to be good at chess. All that matters is the work you put into it. And people said, no, especially for something like chess, surely you've got to have a little bit at least built into the brain. He said, nope, it's all about the work. And he decided to prove his theory by going a little further than most sane people would go. Here's what he did. He put an ad in the local newspaper, in the personal section. Here's what the ad said. Hi, I would like to find someone who is willing to marry me, have my babies, and help me raise them to be chess grandmasters. I kid you not, it was the actual ad. It sounds like it could come right from here in Utah, but no, it was in Europe years and years ago. Someone actually responded. She said, yes, we will make chess grandmaster babies. They stayed married their entire lives, and from everything we can tell, genuinely happily so. They proceeded to have 3 lovely little girls. And at this point, the chess world said, oh, your experiment's over, because there had never been a female chess grandmaster. He said, oh yeah? Here's what happened to his 3 little girls. The oldest one, Susan, became the first female chess grandmaster in all of history. The second one, Judith, became the youngest grandmaster in history, period. Younger even than Bobby Fischer, which is the one chess name that people might know. The youngest one, Sophie, she never became a grandmaster. Here's why. When she was 12 years old, she went to an international chess tournament in Rome, in Italy. This was a huge tournament that had many currently sitting chess grandmasters. Sophie, at the age of 12, beat them all of them, including the grandmasters. The reporters were delighted by this. When they wrote it up in the newspapers, they called it the sacking of Rome. The day after she won this tournament, she went to her father and said, "You know, Dad, I don't really like chess." And she never played again. But you might be able to extrapolate what would have happened if she continued down that particular path. Now, for me, you either have to believe in an astonishing amount of genetic luck, or maybe there is a lot to what that father said. It's much more about the kind of work that you put in than it is the natural talent. And so when I talked with Susan, I asked her, well, when you practice, and she would practice with her dad because he was a chess coach. I said, when you practice, how often did your father give you feedback on your move? And she looked at me like I'd asked a stupid question. And she said, well, after every move. After every single move, they would pause the game and discuss that move for a good 15 minutes per move for the entire game. They would have games that would last years long, single games. She told me she practiced chess a minimum of 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the age of, you ready, 2 years old, and for the rest of her life. That's what made her a chess grandmaster, that kind of dedicated, consistent, steady work. And so based on Susan Polgar and others, we put together a brain-based model for personal development. Here it is. Our acronym for this one is OBA cubed. I don't know if that even makes it easier to remember, but people like acronyms, so there's another one for you. We're starting at the top of the circle, outcome. What outcome do we wish to achieve, and why do we wish to achieve that thing? Then we cycle to the right to blueprint. What's our specific plan for achieving that outcome? What are our milestones? What metrics do we want to use to measure success? Who are we going to team up with to make sure that we can do this thing? Step number 3 at the bottom is act. We start acting on our plan. And then very quickly, we move to the blue assess arrow. How are things going? What do we need to adjust? If we did something well, do we want to reward ourselves? What do we need to change? What biases are getting in the way of our success? And based on our assessment, we jump into the middle of the circle and we adapt. And from adapt, we can go anywhere. We can say, hey, we've hit our outcome. We can say, ooh, I've got to change the whole plan. We can just act again. Or we can go from adapt to assess and just do that little bit over and over again. Susan Polgar did this regularly. And the cycle works best when we keep it as short as possible. She essentially did it for every move with her father. So she had an overall plan, then she acted, they assessed together, she adapted, act, assess, adapt, over and over again. The shorter in time you keep the cycle, we found the more effective it tends to be. And for Susan Polgar, she essentially went through the cycle for every move of her chess game. So it's not just about doing the same thing over and over again. It's about doing the same thing over and over again with a careful plan that helps keep us from falling into our system 1 biases and just doing the same thing badly over and over and over again. This is a nice model to build something that I call learning agility. Learning agility is our ability to do something effectively and well, and learn new things effectively well over time. This is especially important in a modern economy, where the degree doesn't matter as much as how quickly you can learn the new stuff, because things are changing so quickly and so constantly. I've got to tell you, as a person who's a public speaker for a living, COVID threw me for a loop. Being a speaker during a pandemic is a terrible, terrible career choice. In some ways, I'm kind of regretting it now. If I weren't able to adapt quickly, my company would have already collapsed quite some time ago. And it's still a little bit of a gray area, but we're working on it, and we keep our fingers crossed. That ability to adapt and change quickly is what will help our own career move forward more effectively. Questions, comments about what we've covered so far? Yeah.
I just have a question. Is Susan Polka, like the music?
Oh, good question. Susan Polgar, Polgar.
Okay. And what nationality is she?
I can't remember. It's something like Czech. It's some Eastern European country.
Okay.
But you can look her up online. She's got a great big Wikipedia page.
I mean, think it's in my mind, right? That's fantastic accomplishment.
Uh-huh.
But 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, year after year after year, that's great if that is what makes you happy.
Yes.
To me, it's like having that great achievement at the expense of compromising every other possible life experience you might experience or enjoy or learn from. I mean, like I said, if that's what you want to do and that's what gives you happiness, that's great. But to me, it's like, does that accomplishment outweigh limiting your life to only doing that?
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. One of the biggest lessons that I got from studying the greats, not just Susan Polgar, but past greats as well, is there is nothing that I love enough that I want to give my entire self to that one thing.
Right.
Susan Polgar didn't want to be really good. She didn't want to be the best even in a country. She wanted to be the best on planet Earth. And being that level of great takes that kind of a commitment. So for all of us, what this means is, here's the model. How do we use the model to whatever extent we want to create the kind of balanced or unbalanced life that we want to create? You're exactly right. Being the best in the world is a sacrifice. Yeah.
I think that is so interesting because we all think, wow, that person is so good because they were born with some magical talent. I used to be in bands and I played with a guitarist. The guy was unbelievable. Everybody would say he is a genius. I mean, it was magic in his hands. And even when I was back then, in my early 20s, and I sat down and talked with him, he goes, Bobby, 10 hours a day. I sit in my room 10 hours a day and do nothing because I love it. I love it more than anything in the world, sitting there with the guitar in my hands and I knew it's like he's a genius because 10 hours a day, not because he was born with some magical talent. I just knew it back then. It's like, dude, it's about the work.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a great example. And this doesn't mean talent doesn't exist. It does mean it matters much less than we typically tend to think that it does. Did I see a hand up?
Yeah, so there's a book that talked about those three girls. I didn't know her name, but do you know the book?
I do not know the book. I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, it talks about practicing and the best way to practice, because it talks a lot about piano players and how, yes, you can spend hours and hours just practicing the same song, but if you don't have the feedback, right? Like our dad, after every single move, gave her feedback. The practicing is not going to be as effective.
You're right. Typically, when we look at a model like this, we say, all right, outcome blueprint, act, assess, and then we're done. It's the act, assess, adapt, and we don't know how to adapt without that regular, consistent feedback. Honestly, this model is what all greats use, even if they're not consciously aware of it. It's that steady, regular feedback from an expert and enormous dedicated work. I saw your hand too.
What role does your mindset play in all of this? Do you have any insights on that?
How so? Go further. What do you mean?
I just feel like your mindset, your belief that you can accomplish something has a big impact on you actually accomplishing it.
Save that thought. Let me come back to it in about 5-ish minutes, and we'll play around with mindset just a little bit. I want to give you one more story from the greats. Mozart is typically someone who we think of when we think, now there's natural talent. And people love to say he was composing symphonies when he was 5 years old, which, by the way, is true. Mozart was composing symphonies when he was 5 years old. Here's what they don't tell you. They weren't good symphonies, folks. No one plays his 5-year-old symphonies. No one plays his 10-year-old symphonies. No one plays his 15-year-old symphonies. His first truly great symphony, considered great, he wrote when he was 18 years old. Here's his backstory. Mozart's father was an expert too. He was a music teacher. He was not one of the great composers, and he was not a great performer, but he was a good teacher. In fact, he wrote a book on teaching music to children that remained the book that you use in all of Europe for over 100 years. He was good, and he wanted his children to be the best in the world. Mozart started practicing, and he was a dictator. He was not a nice father. But boy, he made some real talent there. Mozart practiced music basically every waking moment of his life from before he was 18 months old. His father made him. In this particular case, he didn't have much of a choice. Thankfully, he found a genuine passion and a love for music. And now, you write a great composition at 18, that is amazing. That is genius. What we tend to forget is, okay, from before the age of 2 to the age of 18, we have almost 2 decades of him spending every day of his life perfecting that. One of the big things I learned studying the greats is I couldn't actually find any evidence for natural talent playing that much of a role for anyone. I couldn't find one single person who became truly great without putting in thousands and thousands of hours of work. Yep. So there you go. Let's talk a bit about how mindset plays a role and a few other tools that we can use. I'm going to use a story again for this one. This one's called School for the Animals. It's a made-up story. I actually use it in one of my books. This book has my favorite title of anything I've ever written. It's called Why the Rhino Scatters His Something. I have a harder time selling this one in Utah than I do in other states, but it's doing all right. This is a career development book, and it uses African folktales from the tribes in my motherland of South Africa. This is an American folktale that someone wrote more recently called A School for the Animals. As I read the story, I want you to think of what this has to do with your own success and your own career development. Here we go. Once upon a time, the animals decided they must do something heroic to meet the problems of a new world. So they organized a school. They adopted an activity curriculum consisting of running, climbing, swimming, and flying. To make it easier to administer, all the animals took all the same subjects. The duck was excellent in swimming, better, in fact, than his instructor. He made excellent grades in flying, but he was very poor in running. Because he was so slow in running, he had to stay after school and drop swimming to practice the running. This was kept up until his webbed feet were badly worn, and he was only average in swimming. But average was acceptable in school, so nobody worried about that, except the duck. The rabbit started at the top of the class in running, but had a nervous breakdown because of so much makeup work in swimming. The squirrel was excellent in climbing until she developed frustrations in the flying class, where the teacher made her start from the ground up instead of from the treetop down. She also developed Charlie horses from overexertion and got a C in climbing and a D in running. The eagle was a problem child and had to be disciplined severely. In the climbing class, she beat all the others to the top of the tree, but insisted on using her own way of getting there. At the end of the year, an abnormal eel, who could swim exceedingly well and also run, climb, and fly a little, had the highest average and was valedictorian. The prairie dogs stayed out of school and fought the tax levy because the administration would not add digging and burrowing to the curriculum. They apprenticed their children to the badger and later joined the groundhogs and gophers to start a successful private school. What on earth does that story have to do with our own development? This being the participation part of the class. Yeah, go
My
ahead.
thought is just like, where everybody's expected to perform, adhere to very specific social norms, even though that may be completely different or opposed to what they may be more talented or inclined to do.
We're making everybody fit a similar mold when our brains do not come from a similar mold. Yeah?
It reminds me of that Einstein quote about the fish. If everybody's a genius in their own way, but if you're judged by how well the fish can climb a tree, then you think you're stupid.
Yeah. Then the poor fish is going to fail the school just like everyone else is going to. Yeah. What happens when we allow others to take us in a direction that's not a good fit for us?
You can't keep the mindset to keep up.
Yeah.
You won't, period.
We get mediocrity. Even the thing we're good at, we're spending so much time at these things over here instead that we lose the thing we're actually good at, and it's burnout our mindset starts to collapse over time, and we lose our motivation to do anything at all. Yet in companies, we see this happening all the time, consistently across the board. Here are the requirements. Everyone's got to be able to do these things, fit in this mold, otherwise we can't have you as part of the team, et cetera, et cetera. If this behavior is so destructive, and we know it is, why do we see it repeated so often in organizations? Yeah.
It's easier.
It's so easy to administer. In fact, it says that in the story. To make it easier to administer, all the animals took the same subjects. So it's way easier on the leadership side. Other reasons? Yeah.
Well, I think we're kind of programmed in school that way.
Yep.
You know, like just even for my own children, it's like, you know, you need to be able to read this amount of words in this amount of time, and if you can't do that, then you're failing. You know, the reality is they're a great reader, they just read slower because their mind processes it a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
And so to overcome that obstacle for them as children, I mean, even my own child, you know, he grows up thinking I'm an idiot because I can't read as fast as everyone else, but he can read. So, you know, I don't know, school does a lot to kids sometimes when you have to fit that certain mold, and it used to bother me when we go in for those tests and they'd say, he's not reading this at this speed. So what? He's reading, you know, he's reading. And
Thank
he reads.
you.
And he's smart, and he's intelligent, and he knows things.
School does it to an extent, like the story showed. And it's programmed in long before school. As humans, we are social animals. We crave the acceptance of the people around us. And so we are surprisingly amenable to going along with things, even though a part of ourselves suspects that we probably shouldn't go along with that thing. Who would you say is responsible for the duck's demise in the story? The duck or the administration? And you can't say both. Who is primarily responsible? I would say the duck, not the administration. The duck at any time could have spoken up, but the enormous weight of that social pressure and the desire to want to do well in the system that was given to the duck made him just go along with it anyway. What could the duck have done to get out of it and to be better?
Quit school and create Facebook.
Okay, could have quit school and done something on his own. Could have joined the Gophers in the private school. What else could he have done?
Make his own school.
Make his own school.
Just
What
a
else? What else could he have done? He could have talked to his teachers. He could have talked to the administration. He could have seen if possibly, instead of jumping and leaving the system, he could change the system.
Yeah.
Now, not every option will work in every case, but there were options for the duck. And the duck's role in the story, to me, is he should have discovered his strengths and then communicated them to the people who might be able to help him focus on those things. To an extent, we tend to assume the people around us are mind readers. Our own interests and talents are so obvious to us that we just assume they'll be spotted by the people around us, and then those people will take us down the right path. That's really not how the world works. People are terrible mind readers, quite consistently so, in fact. And so part of our job is to make sure the right people know what we're good at and can help lead us in the right direction. And you can't always, if no one will listen to you, say, screw the system and join and start your own private school, or whatever it might be. There is, at least in theory, always that option as well. Yeah, Monique.
Well, this makes me think about, you know, us as individuals. A lot of times, and I've just been noticing this myself personally because I do some personal development things with some coaches.
Mm-hmm.
There's times that I look at and I think, man, I don't really know what I'm really that good at. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't take the time. If I wasn't taking the time to really sit down and think about and even just talk to people about it, or even just take the time to research for myself, because, you know, I don't take that time unless I have a coach asking me, hey, what are you good at? Or you need to make a list about these things that you want to create, or where do you want to go? Because we're just kind of on autopilot all the time. You know what I mean?
Right. It takes a lot of work to become good at something. It takes a lot of work just to figure out where we think we might be
Yes.
good at something. And we often don't make time in our lives for that kind of exploration.
I think that's a huge problem in
Yeah.
society.
Let me show you another model. We're going to use this, and this is going to come back to,
Be locked up.
it seems to have frozen up. Thank you kindly. I'm glad we have tech support here. This is a two-circle model. Now I want to talk about two things, potential and passion. Passion plays into, thank you, the mindset that you asked about earlier. Potential I define as your latent ability to do something better than most people. Those are the things that at the very beginning seem to come easier for you than they do for other people. This is your innate talent. I said earlier, talent doesn't matter as much as we used to think about, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So that's what I call potential, that innate talent that could be turned into something great. On the right, I have your passion. This is where your mindset is really positive. You love the thing. You really enjoy doing whatever that thing might be. With those two circles combined in the middle, I call that the engagement zone, where you have a combination of potential and passion. Because without the passion, you're not going to fully realize your potential. You're going to get bored, you're going to burn out, et cetera, et cetera. There are a few things worse than being really good at something that you hate to do. And that traps a lot of people into careers that really aren't the best fit for them. Now, just because you have the potential and the passion does not mean you're actually good at anything yet. You have to have the skill too. And I've got skill defined there on the side. Having the knowledge and ability to do a task well. So if you've got the potential, you've got the passion, you're excited about it, and then you build the skill, you work at it for a good long chunk of time, then I would call that a strength, where you have the potential plus the passion plus the skill. We define weakness then as a lack of potential or passion or both. Notice I do not define weakness as a lack of skill. Why not?
Skill can be taught.
Yeah, you can learn a skill. Potential and passion are kind of innate. You can learn them to an extent, but a lot of it's built in. A skill can be taught. And if you have the potential and passion underlying it, it can be taught in such a way that you can become truly great at that particular thing. So what I'd like to close out with today are a list of tips that we can use to better manage both our strengths and our weaknesses. I'll put them up on the PowerPoint, and we'll go through them. A lot of these are driven with questions. Of potential, passion, and skill, which do you have the most control over? What's that?
Passion.
Not passion. That's kind of innate. Skill. Now, you can trick your passion to go in certain directions, and we've all done it to an extent. But I'd say skill even more. You just buckle down and you do the work. What this means is we want to pick work that fits the other two. Even if we have no skill in that particular area, we should be able to learn it along the way. One company that does this really well is an airline company. Now, prior to COVID and the apocalypse of the world, I was traveling constantly. None of my clients were ever in Utah. So to go to work, I was getting on a plane literally every time. As such, I've developed a real love for some airlines and a fiery, passionate, raging hate for other airlines. One of my favorites, and I've only flown on them once, is Singapore. Singapore Airlines is famous for being among the best in the world at customer service. And they consistently show up in the top spots and have every year for longer than I've been alive on this earth. They really are very, very good. The process Singapore goes through to hire just a flight attendant is remarkably rigorous. And I want to share just a piece of that process with you. If you want to be a flight attendant for Singapore Airlines, you do a whole bunch of other stuff. You get called into an interview. And before anyone shows up for the interview, the interviewer puts a piece of garbage in the middle of the waiting room floor. If while you are waiting for your interview, you pick up the garbage and throw it away, you get a second interview. If you don't pick up the garbage, you do not get a second interview, regardless of how well the first interview itself actually went. Singapore's motto, hire for attitude, and you can teach the rest. Hire for the things that people do innately, and you can then build the skills on top of that. At least works very well for Singapore until I've told the story enough that they have to start changing their hiring practices. Number 2, where in the circles should you focus your skill development? So think back, we're talking about these circles here. Where do you want to focus your own growth? In the green, right in the middle of the engagement zone. You love to do it, and you have some level of underlying passion for it as well. What we recommend is focus on your strengths as much as possible. And instead of fixing your weaknesses, manage them. What's the difference between managing a weakness and fixing it? Yeah.
So I think the difference is knowing that you have that weakness
Okay.
and recognizing that you have that weakness. And then maybe, I'm thinking about the book Strength-Based Leadership, where you go find someone that can help you balance that weakness out.
Okay, so that sounds more like managing. You find someone who can help you balance it. Would that be right?
Yes.
And then fixing is when you work on the weakness directly and try and turn it into a strength. And what I would recommend is avoid fixing a weakness as much as you can. Here's why. It takes a lot of work, and the returns are usually only average at best. One of my favorite examples of someone who fixed a weakness, or tried to, Bill Gates. May have heard of him. He has a little bit of money stashed away. Bill Gates is a technical genius. He really is. And it's part of what allowed him to be so successful as a founder of Microsoft. When he was originally writing Windows, he would write the code himself. He has one weakness that I'm aware of. He was diagnosed with, at the time, it was called Asperger's syndrome. It's now part of what we call the autism spectrum disorder. People on the autism spectrum, social cues and other social things that are built into most brains, they simply don't have. So the difference between a sad face and an angry face, people on the spectrum have a harder time recognizing that. Or even simple mimicry, like holding your hand out for a handshake when someone else does it to you. People on the spectrum simply can't process that in the same way. They also experience a hypersensitivity to stimuli. So they're oversensitive to sight, to touch, etc., etc. And this caused some problems in young Bill Gates' career. When he first had the chance to meet with executives at IBM, the same executives who, by the way, could make all his career dreams come true, he shuffled into the boardroom with his head held down. If he held out his hand at all, it was like a dead fish for a handshake. He either mumbled or yelled everything that he had to say. Thankfully, the executives at IBM recognized his technical genius, and they hired a personal coach just for Bill to teach him interpersonal and social skills. How is he now in terms of social skills? Anyone seen him give an interview?
Yeah.
He's
Average.
He's okay at best. Okay at best. No one ever says, you know what, we got to pump up this crowd. Let's bring Bill Gates in, and that'll take care of it. And no one ever will. Now keep in mind, Bill Gates is a genuine genius, and he has worked on his social skills for decades. And the coaches he has gotten, make no mistake, are the best coaches money can buy. And after all of that work, he's just okay. There's the danger of fixing a weakness. Now, in Bill's case, he kind of had to. If you're going to be the CEO of an enormous, powerful company, you at least have to have some baseline level of social skills. But he got himself to that baseline level, and then he spent his time somewhere else instead. There is another danger to fixing a weakness. Sometimes we overcompensate, and we make the original problem even worse. There's another man by the name of Steve Ballmer. Who knows who Steve Ballmer is? Who is he?
It's a replacement.
Yes, he was Bill Gates' replacement, took over after Bill retired.
Of course.
Yep. And he was with Bill from very early on in the company. Steve Ballmer is a very different human being from Bill Gates. And at one point, and I'm just guessing here, at one point someone must have told Steve, you know, Steve, when you give presentations, you should be more engaging. You should pump it up a little bit. Steve Ballmer took that advice to heart. I'd like to show you a video that highlights what happened when he did. This was one of his very first speeches as the new CEO of Microsoft to a group of more than 25,000 people, programmers, employees, stockholders, and the press. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ballmer!
Did you catch his last words? His last words were, "Who said sit down?" People were not especially impressed by Steve Ballmer's little display. I do feel bad about showing this video because despite evidence to the contrary, I can assure you this is an enormously intelligent man who has made more money in 1 hour than all of us combined will until we are dead. But he wasn't terribly intelligent in this particular case that I chose to show you today. There's a danger of fixing a weakness. Sometimes even the smartest among us will overcompensate and make things even worse. Now, this was a Microsoft conference. These are tech heads. The moment the conference ended, or probably before, that video showed up online. That is the original video. That's why it's so grainy. And as soon as it did, Microsoft's stock went purely on the evidence of this one video. You can watch it anytime you like. Just hop onto YouTube, type in Ballmer monkey video. And this is the first video that will show up in your search. What we recommend instead, and this is where, oh, it's 9:30. All right, I'm gonna go super fast. Here's what we recommend instead. Manage rather than fix your weaknesses. And I've put a few tips for you for doing that. First, just avoid. Avoid jobs that require a strength where you are weak. I am not particularly good at math, so I don't take jobs that require me to do a lot of math. That's the avoid. Second, partner with people who are strong where you are weak. I like to say there are very few, if any, well-rounded geniuses. If you're lucky, you're a genius in one area. But there are well-rounded teams. And so you might be able to find a partner who can compensate for where you're weak. Next, renegotiate the requirements of the current job. If you can get people to shift your job description over time, that can work. Next, adopt enabling technology that takes care of the weakness for you. This is a great one in getting stronger every year. There's one technology we all use every day on the computer to cover a weakness. Spell check, yep. Most of us lack the talent, or especially the fiery passion, for wanting to be world record spellers. So we let the machine do it for us, and most of the time it works just fine. A few other strategies that aren't on this list: move to a different job. That strategy is not the funnest to actually carry out, but sometimes it is the right strategy. Change the system or process of the company. Might work as well if you think you can pull it off. Another thing you can do is manage perceptions. Maybe your work is perfectly fine, but someone's not seeing you in the right light. And if you can simply change the perception of the person, that can shift everything else. I'll close with one last little story about a gentleman named Art Fry. This is Art Fry. He's the man who invented Post-it notes. A huge cash cow for the 3M company, made them millions of dollars. He's just a chemist. And when he came up with the idea of Post-it notes, he did it on his own time. And he presented it to upper management, and they said, well, this is dumb. Who wants little pieces of paper that kind of stick but kind of don't? Stop working on it. He decided to make it a hobby and work on it on his own time. And he created a trial batch of Post-it notes. He gave that batch of notes to the executive assistants of all the executives at 3M. They loved them. And after a few weeks, they came running back to Art Fry and said, we're out of Post-it notes, we need more. He said, sorry, management told me not to make them. You can bet those assistants ran back to the executives real quick. And in record time, Post-it notes made 3M company filthy rich, and him too. What I like about Art Fry is he had the ability to change the company when the company did not fit him, which is not easy at all, but he managed to pull it off. Something else I like about Art Fry, he refused all promotions. He was a frontline chemist for his entire career because he knew what he loved, and what he loved was not management. So he stayed as a good chemist for his whole career. But he was very well rewarded financially for coming up with Post-it notes. Folks, we covered a lot of stuff very quickly, and I knew I'd run out of time, as I do. I did put in a slide of additional resources. There's my website. There's my book, Why the Rhino Scatters Is Something, another book I wrote called Where's the Gift, about seeing feedback as a gift. I did put my email address there too. I talk fast. We covered a lot. I tried to cram in as much as I could in a brief amount of time. Any questions, comments, concerns that you have that were not addressed, email me at any time. I'd be happy to help. If you use one of these principles and it works, huzzah, tell me all about it. If it blows up in your face, I really want to know that too. And I'll do whatever I can to make sure this works for you in the real world and not just in the theoretical confines of a classroom. Well, from Go Neuro and myself, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, your participation today. People here, people online, we're done. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for coming. All right, make sure to get bagels out there if you haven't gotten any this week. Got a lot, so take some home with you.
Those of you here, if you have questions, feel free to chat. If you come up to me, I am immunocompromised, so I'll need a mask on you. But if it's from a distance, we're just fine. Thanks for coming in. Yeah.
Do you live in Utah?
I do. I live in Lehigh.
Okay.
Yep. I don't know why, but I do.